Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Overrun Podcast. My name is Ed Bowder.
I'm Dan Truster.
And we are welcoming our new team member, Jenna Cannon. Paramedic Jenna Cannon is on the show with us today, as well as the EMS Avenger, Jimmy Apple, is here. Danny, we are here today to talk about conferences in EMSWorld. What do we have today?
We got some interesting stuff. It's great to have the EMS Avenger here, Jimmy Apple. We're big fans of conferences. Jimmy, what's been your experiences with conferences, and how did you get involved with going? Because I know we just started out as we were bored with the current stuff and just wanted to hear something different than what we were getting in our refresher classes. What's your take?
For the first probably 2/3 of my EMS career, I didn't even have a concept of conferences, what they were, what they can contribute to your career, to your practice, to your knowledge base, to your ability to have necessary networking, which I do think is necessary in EMS if you're going to continue to progress. I was aware, in a generic sense, of EMSWorld, and I knew that the service that I worked for would fly somebody out there as a reward for their efforts. But to me, it just sounded like a party. So it just wasn't something that existed in my orbit until the Atlanta area launched its own conference, the Metro Atlanta EMS Conference. And I attended, and I was just starting to establish a little bit of a social media presence. And so the people who were organizing the conference wanted to pull me into that orbit to kind of work on those efforts on social media and help promote and help plan the next conference, which I did. And I immediately was rubbing shoulders with people who I followed on social media. Tom Boothlight was one of the first people I met at the conference. And it was an immediate launch point into being connected with actual influential, knowledgeable people. And it was very stark contrast to my understanding of conferences before. And now I find them to be a very necessary part of my EMS existence, just as far as some of the data that you learn there. But for me, it's actually rubbing shoulders with people who are creating policy, who are doing research, who are conducting studies, who are issuing expert opinions. It's just absolutely essential.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I can't agree more. That was kind of our kind of opinion when we were going through and when we were starting the show. One of the best things that I tend to think about conferences is, and I tended to agree, right? The beginning of my career, I felt very much like, in New Jersey, the conferences are usually in Atlantic City, and EMSWorld was in Las Vegas. So it's very easy to kind of tie, the party culture of Atlantic City or Las Vegas to a conference setting. And I do think it's very easy to look at things and kind of say, you know what, this is the kind of place where, like, if we're going to go, my opinion, at least for a long time, was I can always just go and drink with my friends when I feel like it without going to a conference. And the more we started to go, the more we realized that this is actually where kind of idea exchanges, information exchanges go on. And this is where, if you're looking for the newest and most up-to-date information, you can find them. One of the downfalls I tend to find is in a lot of conferences, people will go just to kind of rack up CEUs and almost kind of check boxes. So I'm wondering if that has been your experience, if you've seen that, or if you think that for conferences writ large, if there's different ways that we should approach it, or if you feel kind of where we're at is a good way to move education forward in that setting.
I think local conferences tend to attract the people who are looking for CEUs. They tend to be affordable or even free, and they're accessible. And so right. I think your local conferences do tend to attract. I don't think that people go to places like EMSWorld or like two of the conferences I've been to this year have been Flight Bridges Fast 24 and Nebulized Helmets Crash and Learn. And those sort of conferences are more prestige conferences that tend to attract people who are really there to actually expand their knowledge base. I think and there's some regional things, they're not necessarily local, but they're still somewhat accessible. I think those are kind of your hybrid conferences where you get the people who are there for the CEUs, but some also very open-minded people as well. But, a rising tide lifts all boats. The people who are there for CEUs, you can still, if you carefully package what you're attempting to teach, you can still land some.
No, I think that's right. And real quick, just for the uninitiated, talk about Crash and Learn for a quick second, because that is a very interesting conference type of model. I've never been out there. I would like to go out there, but I'm not an outdoors person. But I'm interested in that. Talk about that a little bit and just what your experience was out there, because the stuff you posted out on socials from Crash and Learn was amazing.
Sure. So Crash and Learn is organized by Heavy Lies the Helmet, which is a critical care podcast, and it's in partnership with Impact EMS, which was formerly IANet. And it is exactly what you said. It's an outdoor conference. And they wanted to do that because the people who are involved in Crash and Learn tended to be outdoorsy people, and they wanted a conference that kind of reflected how they spend their time anyway. And so the first one was in Utah, which I was supposed to attend. Hurt my back. I was not able to attend that. The second one was in the Denver area. And this year it was in Bozeman, Montana. And it is exactly what you think it is. People are camping, they're bringing their trailers, or they're doing primitive camping. Some people are staying in Airbnbs. I've had to stay in an Airbnb for the last few times because my back is just not going to allow me to sleep on the ground or on an air mattress. But you just wake up and you just start fellowshipping and socializing, and you're there with, your tribe basically. And there's, just like any other conference, there's several learning tracks, and it attracts some of the best and brightest in the industry to go there and teach. And truly one of the best.
It sounded really great, and the stuff you put out was amazing. I personally am not a camper. I think if your hotel room opens up to the parking lot, you're effectively camping.
That's our preferred type of camping is actually called parking.
Camping involves a concierge and a king-size bed and room service. I don't know.
Not for everyone. Well, that maybe the Fast 24 is your speed.
But anyway, so it's really interesting stuff. It's really high yield education, but you do kind of have to have a filter up a little bit. Because you have people coming in from different areas, from different jurisdictions, from different types of experiences. Some of them are very well reviewed and researched and according to the literature that's out there. And some of them get a little off in the left field. Have you ever had that experience? Because I've had that experience sitting in one of the breakout sessions and going, who is this guy? Where are we getting this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not to the level of actual cringe, but, the experience I had was at the Metro Atlanta EMS conference. We invited a local physician from a major stroke center, so they weren't a endovascular stroke center, to give a presentation on strokes, and they advocated during their presentation to stop at the major stroke center and don't pass by to go to the endovascular stroke center. And, the evidence-based medicine crowd was pretty horrified by that. And, there was clearly a bias there because that was that physician's facility. So, there's some damage control that had to occur there. I'm actually going to release a video tomorrow, the next day, on a study that demonstrates that outcomes are at least as good if you stop at a major stroke center,
sure, as
opposed to passing by. So, the current recommended practice would be to go to the endovascular stroke center. At Fast 24, which is a very reputable critical care conference, there was a guy who spoke on calcium and was, I would say, fairly zealous about calcium administration in the field, secondary to trauma, and that sort of stuff being kind of an edgy thing that doesn't necessarily have yield to it. And there was no give or take there. And I think there were some questions there as to whether or not this was a little bit too extreme. I know I had posted some of that on social media. There's a lot of pushback against that. So yeah, I've definitely seen that, and there's obviously, it will attract other people as well that, will somehow make themselves a part of the conference.
Yeah, I think that
for
makes a
good or
lot
for
of
bad.
sense. And I guess my worry about it is with conferences is the party aspect of it, which you touched on, and also the impressiveness of younger people coming in, our younger partners and colleagues who are not as experienced in the field, who are coming into this and, maybe listening to somebody oh, they must be the sage on the stage syndrome again. It's like, oh, they must be up here presenting at this conference. They must know what they're talking about. And that kind of leads into where we're going today, Ed, because, oh boy, there was some interesting stuff at EMSWorld.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that came out of EMSWorld. And so before we come back from the break, go to conferences, learn stuff at conferences. Conferences are actually the nidus of this podcast, and everyone here has enjoyed them in the past. There are certainly social aspects to conferences, but one of the best parts is you can get access to some of the best and more up-to-date information while you're there, and you can kind of, rub shoulders with the industry experts. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the drama that happened this year at EMSWorld. Stick around. We'll be back after the break. This episode of the Overrun Podcast is brought to you by Team Life. Your hands can save a life. Learning how to perform high-quality CPR can be the difference for someone experiencing cardiac arrest. Team Life offers CPR certification classes throughout New Jersey taught by trained professionals. Sign up today for CPR certification classes at teamlife.com and learn the skills necessary to save a life. Anyone can be a hero. Now back to the show. Hey, it's Ed and Dan, and joining us now is Lou Imperatrice from DocGo. He has appeared on the show before. What's going on, Lou?
Hey, Lou.
Not much. Trying to get caught up after being at EMSWorld for the last week.
Which is good because that's what we're talking about. We talked a bunch about conferences and the value that they have. But Lou, we wanted to bring you on to talk a little bit about what we're about to get into with our guest Jimmy Apple. What did you see at Stand and Deliver during EMSWorld this year?
I had the opportunity to sit in on the Stand and Deliver preliminaries. I will say that 99% of the individuals who presented there were very well informed, excellent presentations. Kudos to all of them for getting up there. But I also got to witness something that was very interesting that I will say was almost feeling like I was on an episode of Shark Tank. A gentleman who I don't think
are we being filmed? Where's the camera?
I don't think he quite understood the concept of Stand and Deliver, but this gentleman who came.
Hey, Lou, before we get into it for the audience, maybe people aren't familiar, or some of the younger audience isn't up on what Stand and Deliver is. Just give us a brief overview of what the program is, what it's designed to do, and then you go into the trash fire.
Sure. So Stand and Deliver was, I believe, developed last year. And what it does is, national or international conferences, they get thousands of people who submit to speak. And, of course, you can't accept all of them. They try to have industry leaders, cutting edge topics. So Stand and Deliver allows anybody to sign up to give a 15-minute presentation on what they want to deliver and what they want to speak about. A panel of judges who are, some of the industry's top leaders will review them, and then comes down to 4 finalists, and then the 4 finalists present in the lecture hall in front of probably about 100, 150 people, and then the winner is guaranteed a spot to speak in a 1-hour presentation at the following year's EMS conference. That's cool. A little bit about what Stand and Deliver is.
Very cool, and a great opportunity for somebody who wants to break into the conference world or be a presenter. You've walked around, you see these guys with tags on their IDs, and you're like, how do I do this? Great idea.
And it can also lead to really good things. Our own Anna Ryan was part of Stand and Deliver last year. She presented at EMSWorld this year. She presented to a sold-out room, just a fun little plug for Anna. But it is a program that can actually get new speakers. It can build new audiences, which is kind of the point. But so you talked about 99% of the people that you saw did really well. Let's talk about the rest of them now, Lou.
Well, one quick thing too, like one of the really great things about Stand and Deliver is that the judges give feedback, real-time feedback to the presenters, what they should improve, what worked well, And these are, top people, industry leaders, the National Registry chairman, so they're getting real-time feedback on this from these people. So anyway, so a gentleman came on and he introduced himself. He's a paramedic and a nurse. Had a presentation, a slide deck. It was looked like it might have been done by maybe my 10-year-old daughter, but beside the point. So he started to present and he handed out a series of books to various individuals in the room, myself included. And he opened up his presentation and said to the panel, he said, the National Registry is a fraud, and they are creating cookbook medics. They do not allow for free-thinking medics, and I'm going to teach you with my series of books and social media posts and YouTube shorts and YouTube videos how to beat the National Registry and how to be a free-thinking medic and treat patients how they really are treated in real life. So, okay.
And not to reinforce this, but again, this was in front of the National Registry of EMTs. He was presenting this in front of the board members of NREMT.
Correct. One of whom who had literally the night before won the Lifetime Achievement Award for the work she did with the National Registry. So he goes on and talks about the different types of patient populations. I'm going to use some probably language that is, I don't support, but he referred to people as Black American demographics. He referred to people as Hispanic panics. He referred in one part of his lecture that Asians don't call 911, they just get sick and die. So this is how he's presenting it. He's telling us that the National Registry is basically creating questions that are based off of a protocol book that he held up that was written probably 20 years ago. And he continued on and on in just a misogynistic, racist, and absolute bigotry through the entire thing. It was the most uncomfortable experience that I've ever sat in, listening to him say, we don't do assessments on certain patients because they just don't need it. He literally said, let me grab my phone here and I'll read some things that have been highlighted that I kind
absolutely.
of so under neonatal resuscitation, he put in quotes the dead baby dance.
The dead baby dance. Yeah, we talked about that with Jimmy.
He also, in EMS, we are a team. Fire, police, EMS, he has a line here that says, get the patient to the gurney, get the patient in and out. Besides, can I use language here? I'll quote it. So besides, fuck fire, they don't matter anymore.
60% of EMS in the United States is fire-based, just for the record.
Correct. Under his anxiety chapter, the quote-unquote breakup protocol, they don't call it Hispanic panic for no reason. And then the one that really kind of hurt me the most, especially with everything that's going on, is under his, what he still calls as excited delirium, which we all know is a term that we don't use anymore. He says, your career doesn't need the added risk. It's evidence-based medicine at this point that using chemicals on Black Americans after a law enforcement encounter, they will die. These are direct quotes from his book. And then, the one here that says, we don't need to do the standard assessment on Black American demographics. Instead, we should be doing the donut assessment. Comorbidity factors, donut meaning diabetes, obesity, hypertension, neuropathy, and all of it untreated. So this was how uncomfortable I felt in this.
So Lou, before you go on, what was the room doing when this went on? Because this is like, he's literally pouring gasoline over himself and he's going to light a match, right? I mean, what are you doing?
Great question. I was kind of just, at a loss for words.
Okay.
Sitting next to me was Jenny Kaplan, who's the head of the Methodist University, I believe, their EMS degree program. She had a mortified look on her face.
Yeah, I
truly
just want to
mortified.
point out Jenny's contribution to this whole internet thing was she had a long plane ride home and apparently went through the entire book and highlighted and made notes. And I can't thank her enough because I had to plow through it last night for show prep. And I'm going, like, my whole
for what
face
it's worth,
was fringe.
And it's also not like a little bit of misinformation. The book, I think, is something like 125 pages. Ginny has made notes on at least 71 pages.
This is going to boggle your mind, Ed. This is one book in a series of 5.
Oh, good. Even better.
He has 5 books. And more astonishing.
Just for the record, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was only 3 books. Just so we're clear.
I literally left the book on the table when I walked out of the room. Hindsight, I probably should have kept it just to see what was in it and further go into it. But I was so mortified, I left it on the table as kind of like a screw you to him almost.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want your book. You can take it. But I did go back to my room that night and I kind of got into a deep dive of his social media and his YouTube, which is what scares me even more because there are, most people aren't picking up books anymore. They're going to TikTok, they're going to Instagram, they're going to YouTube. Yeah. And this guy is teaching. He has one video where he's literally referencing American Heart Association protocols with the Red Cross protocols up and then telling you that the American Heart Association protocols are wrong. Yeah. I mean, this is what people are saying. And as EMS educators, like, we have to stop this because people think this is appropriate. And what scares me even more is that, I know we're supposed to be talking about EMSWorld, but what scares me even more is that the general public who doesn't know EMS and then sees this, they think that when they call 911, this is who's coming to get them. People who are showing up to the Hispanic household just saying, it's Hispanic panic, which is, just so detrimental to all the progress that is being made and trying to be made.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say that this is a real problem because as preceptors, as educators, when we've all taught, we're all instructor, we all precept, we all do this stuff. We can't control what our students are looking at when they're at home. And this is the kind of guy that they end up seeing, and they think that that's the way you do it for real, quote unquote. And it's a huge problem. This guy is really doing some damage to EMS. And, my concern, I was talking about it with my partner, Jenna, which we'll have her on in a bit. How do we prevent this? Like, how do you keep them from watching this stuff? How do you, it's about, we have to steer them to the right resources, not this guy who's telling them stuff that's wrong. Like, his medicine was wrong. That's what was getting me crazy. Like, I get being an edgelord, and, we're on a show where we do a lot of EMS pop culture, and we joke around, and we have an explicit rating, and I get it. But the medicine's got to be right. You can't sit there and say there's nothing to be done for stroke, for example, pre-hospital. No. Recognition and transport decisions are huge. Angina, or what are you talking about? Varices being all about anemia. That's not true. Like, his pathophysiology's screwed up. Yeah. And they're learning this the wrong way.
And I watched his video on intubation, and I take immense pride in being faculty for the difficult airway course and airway being like my baby. And where his first 5 minutes of the video, he grabs the bougie and says, everyone who uses this thing, throw it out. That's the standard of care nowadays, is the bougie for intubation. And he just says, whoever uses this, I believe referred to it as a wet noodle, throw it out. So, you're trying to teach students and then they're getting this. But I think the biggest thing that's, hopefully can come of this is that he did this in front of an audience at EMSWorld that truly is running EMS education, and they have the resources to put a stop to this person, to put that information out there via social media, via press releases, or via maybe cease and desists or whatever it may be from these agencies saying that this is not right. This is wrong. And I think that's the best thing that could come of this is he did it in front of those people who have that type of influence within the industry. It wasn't like a local conference where, he's who everyone's looking up to. People in the room and Stand and Deliver, they're looking up to the people who are sitting in the panel, not this guy who was in front of the room talking just like completely out of his ass.
Yeah. Lou, do you think there's a redemption arc for this guy? Do you think there's a way you can pull this back and kind of go right, or is he cooked?
I think if this was one video where he maybe made an off-color comment or, a bad joke or whatever you want to refer to it, there's always redemption for that. You walk it back, you apologize.
Sure.
But, when you go onto his YouTube page and there's hundreds of videos all saying the same thing, there's no coming back from that. It's not an oopsie daisy, I made a mistake, I had a Freudian slip. This is actually what he believes and what he thinks is real. And with the amount of content and the I hope self-published book that he has out there, there's no coming back from this. This guy, in my opinion, he needs his paramedic certification, probably even his registered nurse license, either sanctioned or removed, because if he's putting this down to pen and paper and in video format on the internet for everyone to see, this is what he's doing in real life. Which is the scare.
And we talk about this a little bit with Jimmy coming up, but one of the things that we discuss is, this is something this isn't opinions, these are codified. This is something that he wrote down. And this is something like there's a deliberateness to this.
Yeah, like my wife is Asian, and if this guy came into my house, that's how he's going to feel about her, that Asians don't call 911. It's not a joke. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Despite the fact that he's there for a 911 call for an Asian person. Like, it's it's that thing, like the evidence is in front of you. Those calls are coming from inside the house.
Exactly. Yep. This is coming from what he really does, and he thinks it's probably right. And we're in EMS. I get it. We all make jokes. You and I work together. We come back. We joke about something. But that's the kind of stuff that stays private, and we know it's a joke. We know it's burning off steam, supporting our mental health, whatever it may be. Never in my right mind would I ever think about doing that or treating a patient that way, or going any farther than an inside joke with your partner that you both know and trust each other. But when you put it to pen and paper and then you go in front of a conference of literally like 20,000 people and walk through the exhibit hall and handing this book out to Flight Bridge Ed and Prodigy and these huge EMS educations, what are you doing for yourself or the industry, or even concerning for me as an educator, what are you doing for the students? What are you doing for them? You're literally taking them years and years and years backwards in a time in society where, racial injustice and all of that stuff is at the forefront. We're seeing papers come out that say truly, African Americans get poorer care from certain demographics. We're seeing papers that Hispanics, get poorer care. And we're trying to move away from that and say, like, everybody gets the same care. And then you got this guy putting out a book saying, don't medicate Black Americans because they'll die by the police, which is like, come on.
Yeah. No, you touched on something, Lou, that I just want to kind of reach out to. We all understand gallows humor. I'm a Gen X medic. I grew up in the bad pre-internet days when it was like the Wild West. Do you think maybe it's time that we start looking at gallows humor as just not a coping mechanism or not a positive coping mechanism? We've gotten away from the barstool debriefings of my youth and recognizing, hey, that's a negative overall that outweighs the positives that it may bring. Do you think we're at that point with gallows humor now? Like, we just have to just say, listen, we're here to help people. We're going to do our job. And just stop the bullshit.
I think we are, especially with, now a lot of different courses coming out, MHRO courses, PTEP courses, and the stigma really going away. I think that we really do need to move away from that. I'm like you, I'm older. I've been doing this a long time, but there's a time and place for it. And I think with now getting rid of that stigma and having the resources available, that it is becoming by the wayside. And that was one of the things at EMSWorld. There were so many lectures on mental health and supporting mental health and how to cope, that these resources are out there. So I do agree. I think that, us as, old school medics now, we need to kind of shift that paradigm away and say, like, hey, man, it's probably not appropriate to be talking about that, but like if you're struggling with something, we can get you the resources that you need. And that was such a big focus on the conference that I really took away was, mental health of the provider and taking care of yourself and your others, especially in a post-COVID world. And now, the political environment we're in and everything else going on. That was a huge focus. There was, I'm on here to talk about the conference, and I just want to say that literally 99.9% of it was phenomenal.
Right.
And I have not a bad thing to say. I learned so much. I met so many people that I've only read their books or took their classes online, and you get to meet them in person and see the change they're really doing for EMS.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got this jabroni, excuse my language, but like over here, Shark Tanking us and trying to sell a book that not to mention was the content so bad, but if you visited his website, and I don't like to talk bad about people, but if you visit his website, it's horribly looking. I mean, it's not like done well. If you
and that's
misspellings in the book.
It is a very it also seems fairly hastily put together, but again, not to cast aspersions on like the tech aspects of it, and you're right, 99% of most conferences are great, and that's not to be lost. Lou, you gave a talk at the conference, so I don't want to take away from that either, but in this particular setting, the reason we want to discuss this is to try and get that this information is out there, and then bring it down as much as we can and try to explain like this isn't moving us forward, this isn't making us better. But Lou Imperatrice from DACO, thank you so much for giving us your insight. We're coming back with Jimmy Apple in a minute.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, it's Ed, and I want to tell you about the Monday Afternoon Journal Club. It's a new thing we've been doing on the Overrun here on YouTube, and we're really excited about it. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback for it. What we're doing is we're taking new journal articles that have been published within the past year, 6 months, 3 months, and sometimes even the past couple weeks, and updating you about new EMS information, whether it's clinical care, response times, operations, all of those things. We're bringing you the newest EMS data. So subscribe to the Overrun on YouTube and check out the Monday Afternoon Journal Club most Monday afternoons. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the Overrun Podcast. Ed Bowder and Dan Schwester here with Jimmy Apple. So let's talk about what happened at EMSWorld. If you follow EMS on social media, you will see that there has been, what's the right word? I'm going to use the word charlatan, who has been spreading some less than desirable EMS information out there, presenting himself as a way to kind of beat the system around National Registry of EMTs, as far as how to learn. Jimmy, you've been kind of running point on this since some of the stuff came out. So I'm interested in your thoughts and opinions. And let's talk about how to get rid of some of the less impressive education opportunities out there.
So I woke up, I don't remember exactly what day it was. Maybe it was Friday, but I woke up and I had so many tags on TikTok and on Facebook and on Instagram. I would have thought that somebody very important died or something, but it was everyone alerting me to the fact that there was an individual who was an attendee of EMSWorld who was distributing EMS manuals, self-published or self-printed, because I doubt that any publisher, even Amazon, would allow any of this to get through their filters. But self-printed manuals, EMS manuals, study books, that sort of thing, preps for the National Registry that contained incredibly racist material and offensive material. And he was giving it out to anyone that would accept it and attempting to sell his wares and preach his own gospel. And he also spoke at the Stand and Deliver component of EMSWorld, which is essentially you are given free rein on the microphone and you're supposed to give a presentation on the spot. And his presentation was essentially a kill list of everyone who was on his radar, including EMSWorld itself, educators like Jeff Murphy with Master Your Medics, and he definitely let everyone know what he felt about some of our premier educators in the field. And this made its way around social media very quickly and became one of the biggest things happening in EMS. And I got a chance to see a lot of the material that was in these manuals. And at first it was just like the racist material and some really tasteless references to neonatal resuscitation, pediatric resuscitation. But as the smoke cleared, people were actually getting his manuals and reading through his manuals. And even the pathophysiology and the practice recommendations were so cringe and weird. I have no words to describe it.
And this content, just to be clear, because we've been working on background on this for the past day or two. The story of what happened was this gentleman went up to, as Jimmy said, to stand and deliver. And then arguably the ballsiest move I've heard of in a long time, went ahead and stood up in front of people from NREMT to discuss how bad the NREMT protocols are. This booklet got essentially widely distributed to a lot of people at EMSWorld. So this is a book that got to the people that you kind of don't want bad data to get to, right? Because it's, the way that it's all written and listed is you should do this, you should do that. And it gets back to the people who kind of did the research to say that these ideas are wrong. And there's the amount of, poor thought, racism, sexism that's involved in it. Some of the phrasing is deeply troublesome. As you mentioned, Jimmy, you talk about some of the NRP problems in it. I'll tell you, in the text, it lists the NRP protocols as the dead baby dance, which is just one of the worst things that I've read in medical literature. And I'm someone who I enjoy old medical literature, so it's a lot. I know there's references to how, and there's a lot of absolutes, right? Where it talks about all Hispanic people are hysterical. It talks a lot about turfing people inappropriately. There's a lot of talk about heroism and how you look, like making the medic look cool or making the tech look cool. Yeah, Danny, what did you think about some of this stuff? Because it's one of those things where it feels like it was hard for me to read. And say that as, we go through the data, we go through information. When you're reading something through, it's a lot of it felt like, how do you even get to this point, let alone how could you try and teach this?
Opportunity to, when I look at these things, I try to keep an open mind, right? I want to stay in the middle of the road. I don't want to be too judgmental to one side or another or let other people influence how I'm thinking. So I'm going to read this objectively. And I originally, my initial thoughts were, all right, he's trying to be a little edgy. He's trying to be different. And as I went deeper into it, I'm like, no, he's really not. He really has dislikes for and biases against certain parts of our population. And he can't take care of that, right? We've had people on that have talked about biases before and said, listen, we all have them subconsciously or consciously. But professionally, we're supposed to be able to handle that. This guy puts this stuff in writing. He was talking about, you talked about with Hispanics being more emotional and fired up. He talks about the dead baby dance for neonatal resuscitation. And, but what caught me as I went through the 72 screenshots, thank you, LinkedIn, was the medicine was wrong. A lot of what he was doing or telling young medics or EMTs to do was physiologically not consistent with what we know. Things like what we do for strokes doesn't matter, so don't bother with it. You're just going to get a refusal on this patient. Don't even put a sheet on the cot. It's little stupid things like that, but it was very dismissive.
He also repeats the myth that people of color feel
I'm glad you brought
Caucasians.
I'm glad you, Jimmy. I'm glad you brought that up because I was kind of like, holy, wow, we've debunked that. That doesn't exist anymore. It's
it's one of the most well-studied concepts.
And he just kept plowing through. The more I read and the more I dug into it, and thank you to whoever, I'll get her in the show notes, but whoever was on LinkedIn who had a 7-hour flight home from EMSWorld, Jenny Kaplan, thank you for doing this and putting this out there. She went through this entire pile of garbage and highlighted and pointed things out. One of the things she pointed out was very interesting, that when he talks about MIs, apparently the only MIs we have are inferior wall MIs. Like there's no other elevations or depressions. And that's a real problem, because what if you don't see that 2-3 AVF pattern and you're a brand new medic? You're going to say, this isn't an MI? Like it gets to be dangerous when we talk about it. The other thing I noticed that he talked about was trauma resuscitations. And he lumped them all into one thing where he's like, they're not going to make it anyway, so just go through the motions. And we know that penetrating trauma in trauma cardiac arrest, penetrating traumas can be clean saves if we recognize them and we can get them to a place that'll do a thoracotomy right away. We know this stuff. This has been out there, and we know that the survival rates are higher with that population. Now, blunt trauma, I'm not going to argue that, but he's lumping the...
I would say, though, that he's probably working with he's definitely working with an older mindset that isn't considering things like doing a needle decompression or a finger thoracostomy, bilaterally. He's not thinking about services that can do pericardiocentesis. He's not thinking about the fact that we have whole blood in the field now. I mean, there are people walking around who have been resuscitated from blunt traumatic arrest, and the notion that it is all or nothing that's dogmatic and old practice.
It even discounts things like ultrasound in the field. It just doesn't mention those things. And I've seen programs like this because there's also a niche industry amongst like medical students where you have things like, all right, this is the easiest way to learn, the Krebs cycle, or the easiest way to understand these different pathologies. So to an extent, I understand the audience that he's trying to reach. My objection to it is that it's kind of like trying to do the cheap thing of, doing it the easy way or doing it the quick way instead of doing it the right way. And the way that it tends to be phrased, because again, like we can talk for hours, I'm sure, and we have actually over the past couple of days about all the many and varied things that are wrong with this particular booklet. But I also think kind of the more insidious thing is that it just talks about, you can look cool, you can go out and do basic stuff, and these people aren't going to live anyway, so what's the point? And it feels like when we work toward progress, we have these kind of things come out where it's like, this is the easier way, this is what you need to know, just get out there and just do the job. And the thing about like going out and looking cool was really upsetting to me. And he talks about like how to tech the hero job, whatever. But it also gets into things like the coma cocktail, going back to the days of using, glucose and Narcan to try and reverse causes, which is at least 10 to 15 years out of date. And it also speaks very glibly about those things. Like, yeah, of course, this is just what it does. And it seems to me it's the worst manifestation of what people assume is like the cool city medic kind of vibe. And that's, I think, the more insidious part, is that there are people who are going to see this kind of content and say, this is the way around it. I don't have to learn. I just have to know these basic things. All we do is transport people to the hospital.
And it reads like the toxic hero mindset became sentient, like an AI, and then partnered with Elon Musk to create EMS AI.
It's like the worst, like the worst
Gotta welcome our robot overlords.
Just kind of materialized out of like the computer swamp, and here's what we have, right?
Let me go back to one thing that you said, though. You were mentioning earlier about the biases and that we all have them. I think that was a really salient point, because we do all have those biases. We've all grown up in very specific contexts and circumstances, and so our thoughts are formed within those biases. And what you're supposed to do is listen to what people are telling you from outside of those bias and try to do better. And there's no doubt that you're sometimes fighting against yourself on a daily basis, but you're supposed to let the angel on the shoulder win in the long run. And this is just a complete failure to listen to the angel on the shoulder. There's a reason why when people get drunk, they become uninhibited and they start saying racist things, is because they have ceased listening to the angel on their shoulder, and they're only listening to their uninhibited self. So it's like somebody has just slain the angel on his shoulder, and all he has right now is the devil on his shoulder, and just not.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I'm old enough to recognize that we all have our things, and we all deal with them, but we're supposed to be in the end professionals, and we're supposed to be trusted by our patients. And that means you have to put that stuff away when you sign in for the shift. You should try to work on keeping them away all the time. But if you can't, at least the 12 hours or 10 hours or whenever you're on the truck, put that stuff away. Stop it. Because it doesn't help you in the end. It's not a coping mechanism. And it's going to end up getting you jammed up when it comes to eventually treating someone or, not treating someone. And so, Jimmy, I guess what's our responsibility as experienced clinicians, as, people that are considered by others to maybe be the informal leaders in their organizations, the FTOs, the preceptors, the people that are trying to, the instructors, the people that are trying to mold the minds of people, and we have to deal with this. How do you, what's your suggestion? How should we do this? What's the strategy?
I think that there was a natural momentum pushback that came out of that helped there. There were the video that I made on TikTok and cross-posted to Instagram. It was universally supported. In fact, I can remember, it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people commenting, who were just disgusted by the whole thing, with one person who said that I am gatekeeping EMS with bringing attention to that, which was ironic.
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you hold back information?
Yeah, but I think that that was actually one of the better stories to come out, which was the overwhelming amount of pushback that there was, not just from the people at the top, because you can always expect, the people at the top to react. I mean, I was contacted by Brian Bledsoe, who, every person in EMS right now is carrying some of Brian Bledsoe around with them in their brain because he's written the textbooks. Brian Bledsoe reached out to me and was like, there's people that I know that I can talk to about this person. And so, getting those people activated is very important. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I know that our instincts are probably to kind of fire and brimstone is on the menu. There's a part of me that really wants to at least offer some sort of opportunity to walk it back. Right? And to say, this was a bridge too far. I don't know how I got here. Let me unpublish this. Let me unfuck this and fall out. I swear. But
it already happened, so it's fine.
Okay. Somehow let me unfuck this, and I tend to think that probably that's not going to go that way, but. The instinct is going to be want to publish his name, say what company he's with, his YouTube channel, all this sort of stuff. Publish his registry number, his nursing license number, he's toxic in two contexts, and attempt to just cancel him into oblivion. I would rather see an olive branch extended and see if there can be a mind change there, because I think that's good mentorship. Is to try to give people an opportunity for course correction. We're already eating our own in EMS enough without having kind of that reactionary, let's just, a blow to the head point blank and we'll be done with them. Yeah.
We can't throw people
Jimmy,
off cliffs anymore.
I think you hit a couple really great points here, and I want to underline them for the audience. The first thing is that this was a grassroots thing. This was not sanctioning organizations coming out and saying, hey, this isn't right, or hey, this isn't right. These were people on the floor at EMSWorld who really believe in the job and really believe in what we do for people, and kind of threw this out there in the FOMED world as, hey, here's a problem. If you're looking at this, or if this is something you're seeing in your classrooms, you got to get on this. The early warning and the speed at which it came out through the internet and the FOMED world was just amazing. The other part of it is, I got to be honest, I really love your sentiment about, can we rescue this? Can this guy pull this back? Can he kind of regroup himself? Because, we do eat our young. We do stuff like that. And do we have to cancel this? Does he have to be PNG'd from everything? I don't know where this goes because I don't know where his mind and his heart is. I will say I think he's dealing with a lot of burnout. He's grown up on a lot of toxic heroism, which we talk about on the show ad nauseum, right? And, we can point out, causatively that even the EMSWorld bears some kind of responsibility because we've sold people this fake bill of goods about this job being heroic and all the crazy things. And we realize those calls are a once in a lifetime. And 9 times out of 10, we're going to the nursing home for grandma because she's sick and she's septic. And we're going to hold her hand and we're going to make her feel better before we take her to the hospital. And that's 85 to 90% of our job. I do like this idea that there is redemption. There's a redemption path for this guy. I think if he's smart, he takes it. But if he doesn't and doesn't do it soon, he's cooked. I just got to say, I think he's cooked.
I think he's cooked too. I think that the momentum is probably unstoppable. And just waxing on philosophically a little bit, we talk about eating our young, but one thing we don't talk about is that there's a phenomenon that exists in the technological world, which is eating our old. It used to be that to have a change in mindset, people had to die. The older generation had to die, and then the younger generation took on the torch of change, and we had change. Now, our sensibilities are changing so rapidly, and information is disseminated so rapidly that standards of how to behave are impossible to keep up with. And when I say that, I want to reassure people that I am very progressive, and I believe in respecting everyone's identity and all the progressive sensibilities. I believe in all of that, but it happens so fast that there are generations that can't keep up with it, and particularly the older generations who don't necessarily exist in social media, half of their waking hours, and we expect them to pivot quickly as information changes, and most of the time they're not capable of doing that, and so we cancel them, and I'm not sure how fair that is.
And I think that's right, and especially from, and whatever, this is a group of 3 people who are perpetually online. So I think it's, it's easy to kind of get lost in that, where, you realize like we were talking about, gender differences in pain earlier. Last night I found 5 studies from 2023 that talked about how women's pain is kind of, dismissed generally, which was something that was kind of found in this, text, I guess, that was distributed. So this is also stuff that's kind of easily debunked when it's put out there. But I do think that's right, where there's a generation that is of the mind that, things used to be different, things used to be easier. It's kind of, the load and go mentality. There's certainly a group of providers that kind of, long for the, the 80s, the 90s, the bringing out the dead era of EMS, where, it's like, oh, well, it used to be fun when we could, mess with homeless people and stuff like that. And yeah. I think that we've, as an industry and as a profession, I like to think that we've moved past the part where, we're making fun of the populations that we see. And what I'm suggesting is I'm not suggesting we don't blow off steam, we don't decompress in our own little ways. What I am suggesting is that once that starts getting translated into how you're treating patients based upon your, implicit bias, the bias that you have internally, or, projection that you've done. And we've all worked in cities. We all know, the reason that we're talking about this is that this isn't something that's unknown to us. It's just one of those things where, there's manifestations that get out where this can't be the way that medicine progresses.
That blow off of steam used to happen in a supply closet between 2 people, right? And that was healthy. I can remember my wife at the time, years ago, who was a CICU nurse, coming home and being frustrated because they had a patient who was very sick. And by all rights, probably should have passed days ago. And it was emotionally and physically exhausting to provide the convalescence that this patient needed during this time. And I can remember her saying, I just wish that she would. And that was something that was said between her and I in our kitchen. And no one heard that. It wasn't blasted on the internet. It didn't become viral.
She didn't say it to the family on the unit.
And that's where it died. But now that in and of itself is a cottage industry online as far as that sort of low enough of steam, and the dark humor it is self-perpetuating and is kind of a positive feedback loop at this point, and has become almost like it's a human centipede, really, that just keeps
it actually does.
Itself,
I was going to lead into another thing. Like, I was going to run by you what you thought about, like, should we not be exposing new students to gallows humor? Should we be really cautious about what we say in the truck or in the crew room? If we've got younger, more impressionable students or younger EMTs and paramedics around, the stuff that flew 25 years ago doesn't fly today. And, the conversations that you have with your partner going to a call, and, Jenna can vouch for me, like, that she would say, there are certain addresses in our service area that we roll our eyes the minute we get a dispatch to, and we just go, we're like, we know what it's going to be. But you get out of the truck and you have to be on stage, right? You have to be professional. You have to treat that patient with dignity and respect, because that's what the job entails. I guess the question is, has gallows humor played out? Are we done with it? Is it time to turn past it and kind of look at it as, like, it's a symbol of an earlier age, and it's not something we should be doing?
I don't find it to be productive, and I try very hard not to engage in that sort of humor. And I want to be careful, because I'm just one person, and I don't process that way. I haven't studied this well. So I have looked into it a little bit, and there's some data that suggests that, some momentary gallows humor does kind of help people process. But those studies are in isolation. Like, it's not compared to petting a dog or talking to somebody.
But what
on
does
phones.
compare to petting a dog, though, Jimmy?
Exactly. Exactly. Or calling someone on the phone and just, rehearsing what you just went through, or I don't know, squeezing one of those things we used to do in high school that we would squeeze to strengthen our
stress balls.
Yeah, stress balls or whatever. I think there are ways to funnel frustration that don't involve saying things that can take on a life of their own.
And just getting back to the gallows humor bit, and the first thing is, nothing compares to petting a dog. And I do want to mention, Jimmy has a new puppy that he has not brought onto the show. I don't know why, but very excited. I'm super excited to see all your social posts with your new Basset Hound pup. It is the most adorable dog I've seen.
The pup potty trained, and so I can't have her just like hanging out.
Can't have her just sitting there
right now. Yeah.
But as far as the gallows humor thing, because that is something that I participate in. That's always been one of my kind of coping mechanisms. And to me, the type of comedy I enjoy tends to be, the more hyperbolic, the more extreme, the funnier it is. But the difference for me is, it's one thing to have a certain type of sense of humor, and certainly, and Danny can attest to this, my sense of humor is very selective. I find out often that people don't share the same sense of humor that I do. But the other thing is, it's different when you put it into policy, right? So it's one thing to be, to go out and be a silly goose and say all the stuff you're going to say and whatever. And Lord knows, in the age of memes, and I mean, it's funny to me that we're having this conversation less than a week removed from, a former commander-in-chief talking about eating cats and dogs, where, it's this type of hyperbole feels kind of weird. But again, it's when you actually start to codify these things, where it's, you can say, okay, and as I said, we've all worked in urban environments where it's like, all right, it's 2:00. There's, oh, look, it's a drunk patient on the corner, right? We've all had those conversations, and I don't want to pretend like we haven't. The difference is that when we get to the scene, we still treat the patient, right? We start an IV, we monitor their vital signs, we make sure that they're not sicker than we think they might be. We still take the time to make sure we're not missing something. And that's kind of the whole point, is this material that's being distributed is trying to encourage students to actively do less for the sake of passing a test. And that's what drives me nuts. And again, this is something that exists throughout the entire medical education industry. Whether you're in med school, nursing school, PA school, there's always this type of grift that exists where it's, if you pay me X, I guarantee that you'll actually pass the exam, without realizing that the problem isn't passing the exam. It's becoming a provider that can actually help people and improve their outcomes. That's the entire reason that we're here. So not to say that I don't really care if you can't pass an exam. Like, you have to pass the exam to get out into the field. But if you don't know why you're doing the things that you're doing, it doesn't really seem to have any value or purpose, at least for me. I don't know what you think.
I think you're right. I think that we should be teaching knowledge as opposed to passing a test. I think when we get into that cookbook idea of, well, say this, and this, and to its credit, I think the NREMT has recognized that and moved past that with dropping the psychomotor test, which I think was a great step forward for the profession. Bravo to them for recognizing that this was kind of subjective. It wasn't really validated. It wasn't a great test of, you could have a terrible medic, have a great day on that test. You could have a great medic student, have a terrible day on that test. Didn't really give you an insight. I think that's true. The other thing I was going to say is about the edginess and the dark humor. I think, and this is going to date me, going back on TV and when we used to watch, TV shows like episodically and not, binge watch on Netflix, the wisecracking doctor was a stereotype. It was something that existed, right? When I was a kid, like, you wanted to be Hawkeye Pierce. You wanted to be George Clooney on ER. Later on, we wanted to be Perry Cox, right, on Scrubs. And some of the people, what they get away from that is, yes, they were wisecracking and they were sharp to their leaders, and they fought for what was right, and they fought for what the patient deserved. And they didn't let their own emotions control how they took care of patients. It was always based on what the presentation was, and it was always for the right reasons. And it didn't work all the time, and that hurt them down the road, and we got to see that. But it's an important thing to say that if you're going to be that, if you want to be that person or you see them, you have to realize that takes time. It's something that is almost unattainable. You're better off just go do the job and take care of people. You're going to help people every time you go out the door. It might be little, it might be huge. They might not even care, but you're going to do that. And you have to walk away from it with that and stay away from the toxic heroism, because it's just going to destroy you. This idea that everything we do is heroic, everything we do is, hanging from a pipe, defibrillating somebody in a puddle, all the bullshit stuff that you see on TV today. I mean, I just saw an ad today for one of the new shows. It's called Beanado or something like that. Like 400,000 bees bring out, like,
I was just thinking about that.
Jesus, really?
Bees.
Like,
Yeah,
Jesus,
it's the show
really?
911.
Are we doing this?
I was telling my girlfriend when I saw that ad last night.
Whatever.
I think that's 911. That's the show.
It's 911. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, if I encountered on a daily basis what they encountered, I wouldn't last a year in this field. Like, it just would. You talk about PTSD after 10 years in the field of what you experience. And
PTSD after 10
days,
episodes.
I would be miserable.
I wouldn't even say that. Listen, I was taught that scene safety was the most important thing. If there's 400,000 bees coming my way, I'm out. I'm running as fast as I can. I don't run very fast, but I'm out of there. That's my first thing.
You just have to run faster than
pretty
they.
much.
Exactly. I don't have to run faster than the bees. I have to run faster than you.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that went on with all this. So one of the things that we like to do at the end of the show is I like to ask the guests to give a little bit of hope. Jimmy, one of the things I admire the most about you and your content is you work very hard to progress yourself, to progress the industry, to progress the practice, and to make things grow and to make providers better. So in light of seeing this type of very upsetting, air quotes, educational content being put out there, as we're trying to grow the profession and grow clinical acumen among people, when you see stuff like this, what is it that keeps you going? What gives you hope to keep kind of pushing forward and not get sort of distracted by these things? And then we'll take another break.
Well, I think you have to have a realistic look at the job. I think that the notion that we are lifesavers who are out there providing emergency care on every call is an outdated notion, and it sets up it's expectations that can't be met, and it sets somebody up for failure, because they are never going to be happy if that's what they think is going to happen on a daily basis. And the people aren't prepared properly when they get into EMT school and progress through paramedic school. They're not prepared for what their job is actually going to be, which is you're not an emergency medical provider. You are a pre-hospital healthcare provider. And people are going to call a number so that they can get this pre-hospital healthcare provider to their home and provide them a pre-hospital health screening because something about their health is off. That may lead to a transport to the hospital, an uneventful transport. It may lead to a refusal. It may lead to you doing CPR or providing pressors or intubating them or what have you. But most of the time, it's not going to involve much. And I think people need to have this mindset that they are a healthcare provider now. That needs to be the paradigm. You are a pre-hospital healthcare provider. You don't vary much differently from people who work in urgent cares or emergency rooms, because people treat all of those things the same. It's just a matter of which is more convenient. So for me, there's no one who exists right now in EMS who knew a paradigm where people called 911 for emergencies only, right? So the notion that I would get frustrated that that's happening, that people are calling for these pre-hospital health screenings, is cognitively dissonant. So I look at it as that we often talk about saving lives. And saving lives isn't necessarily about performing compressions, about dropping plastic in somebody's trachea, sticking a metal needle in somebody's arm. Sometimes it's just the recognition that they have inherent value to society because they are a human being. And when you can affirm somebody's humanity on a daily basis, several times a day, to somebody who you are their last rung in the ladder, that is immensely gratifying to me. And I think that that's an attitude that if more people adopt, not only would they impact society in a better way, but they would literally
that's
elevate
beautiful.
themselves.
Amazing.
That's terrific. Jimmy Apple, the EMS Avenger. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jimmy. Be sure to follow Jimmy on all of his socials. I'm sure if you're listening to the show, you're already following him, but it is some of the best free information you can get on the internet. Jimmy, thank you for coming on. Really happy to have you on here.
Anytime.
Glad to have you in the sphere. Glad to talk to you socially and personally and all of that. Follow Jimmy on all the social medias. He's got a YouTube channel out now too.
Thanks
Check
again,
that
Jimmy.
out, and we'll be right back on the other side of the break.
All right, and welcome back to the show. Ed Bowder, Dan Schwester, and our new contributor, Jenna Cannon, is here. Jenna is a paramedic in New Jersey. Tell everyone who you are, Jenna. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan's partner. I'm part of the Council of Gens that manages Dan. I'm the work side. I've been a paramedic for a little over 4 years, and I am a pretty active preceptor where I work.
And she also just certified her flight medic, so we have to give her credit for that. Yay, Jenna, go. Jenna, we wanted to bring you on, aside from bringing you onto the team and introducing you to everybody. You were kind of a part of this whole discussion with everything that was going on in EMSWorld, and we wanted to bring you on and kind of get your perspective from it, because at this point, Danny and I, have been doing it collectively, I think for something like 45 years or something dumb like that. So we wanted to kind of get the idea of someone who is actively trying to progress in their career, which is certainly the phase that you're in right now. So what was your reaction when you first read all of these stories about this book that came out and all the horrible things that were said in it?
I think that I have educated myself enough that like I read it and I rolled my eyes and I was like, this is trash and these are trash ideas. But like my biggest concern was for those brand new medics and new medic students who, might be struggling a little bit and they're looking for something to help supplement their education because the paramedic book is dry. Sometimes your instructors are dry. Sometimes you just don't get it and you need another like perspective on something. My big issue with him was that not only is he giving bad information and ways to cheat the test, which you never get anywhere by cheating, was that he was bagging on like good like people who put good content out. He bagged on the paramedic coach, Evan. He bagged on Master Your Medic, who I think his resources are excellent for paramedic students. That's who I recommend and who I used myself when I was studying to go to boards. So like that's
and we talked briefly about like who he was making these presentations in front of as well, because it's not just it's not just the people that are involved in other educational systems. Like this was done in front of NREMT. I think that and having been a few years removed from medic school, I know that you probably remember there's always a bunch of like study tools that go out. And I mentioned earlier, like certainly in medical school, there's groups that will put out, this is what you need to know for this exam. But from the preceptor standpoint, how do you feel? Like, do you feel that that's ever effective? And I guess one of the things we want to reconcile too is the separation between like the street and the book, because it feels like the sections from that book that were put out publicly sort of read as like, come on, we all know how this works. And I feel like that all fell short. But what was your response to it when you actually saw that?
I didn't enjoy the cool guy, salty medic, treat 'em and yeet 'em mentality when I became an EMT a million years ago. I don't enjoy it now. You don't need to scream into the camera. You don't need to show everybody how cool you are. Like, let your work stand for itself. And clearly it can't do that. So we're going to, just be flashy and peacock about it. My other issue is while he is bagging on these legitimate content creators, he's talking in circles, which if you're not really like up to date on what he's talking about, it sounds almost intelligent. Like you definitely could persuade someone if you're a new medic, if you're in medic school, if you're just not super up to date, you're like, yeah, that sounds great, like he's right, spot on, like with the pediatric definition, like right. You're talking gibberish.
Yeah. And Dan, we've seen, now, and we've all worked as preceptors over our careers. I guess the big question, because we always look at the end of the show and we talked about hope earlier, like how do we get out of this? So I guess how do we start to, as a system, sort of kind of resist this type of insidious education?
Well, you leave the easy one to me, right?
Yeah, solve the problem, Dan, go.
Generational thing. We didn't get here in a year, and we're not going to get out of this in a year. This is stuff that's ingrained over generations. And when I read through those pages and I saw what he was writing about, my take was, this is all like back 20, 25 years, the tough guy, the guys who want to be the tough guy medics, the city medics. This was the attitude that they had. And this was the thought was, this is how you
smoking in the cab of the ambulance while having the conversation, that whole thing.
This is the man who hits on 20-year-old brand new EMTs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just got that. Yep. Absolutely.
It does have those kind of vibes to it.
Right? Justify it. I think we need to start as preceptors. I think we need to start realizing that what we're doing is we're getting that next generation ready, right? And we're going to be the people that are moving on, and they're going to be taking on our ideals and our ethos and what we believe in. And this is the time to do this. This is the time to be involved with as a preceptor, to see what your students are doing on their downtime, see what they're reading, ask questions. Hey, are you reading this book? Hey, what do you think about this book? We've had students come to us and all of us and ask, what should I be reading? Or what's a good reference for this? And we'll tell them, man, don't go to this guy's or buy it secondhand. And you know why? Waka waka. But I think we need to start, and it's a job we're not going to finish, but the next generation, or by the time the babies are coming up, this is going to be kind of stamped out, that attitude of, and we go back to this again, it's a toxic heroism, right? We keep going back to the same things over and over and over again. We just have to say enough's enough, and we just move on. We talked earlier about, does gallows humor need to go away? You know what? The reality is it probably does, because there's other resources now. Just like the Barstool debriefings went away. We're pretty much done with that. And you know why? Because the old generation retired off, and the group that was in the middle doesn't want to pass that along to the younger generation.
And Jenna, I'm interested in your thoughts here, as the new generation of preceptors. When you have students that, because there are students that come out with these types of attitudes, and I think it's due in part to texts like these. So if you have a student that is carrying that type of attitude, how do you, how do you start to, sort of drive that out of the student, or how do you discourage that type of thought and behavior?
I always ask if someone makes like a off-colored comment or joke to like try to be funny and edgy. I ask them to explain it. I don't get it. Why is it funny? And then they have to explain. I'm like, I still don't get it. Like, why is that?
Keep going.
Keep going. Please keep doubling down. I would love, and they usually self-correct. They usually realize like, it's not funny. It's not okay.
It's very awkward too. Painfully awkward.
Well, you ask the question and just sit there and waiting for them to answer.
It's like,
Dan just sits there and like is like, oh no, it's happening.
Go ahead. I want to hear your answer. I want to hear what you're going to say to me. But yeah, this is something that, and again, I think that with the coverage that it's gotten, it's probably something that is going to just be a big flash in the pan. But I do think that it's important that as a group, we at least take the time to acknowledge that this kind of stuff is out there. And over time, it can be really, really deleterious to what we're doing and, and to patient care and to patient outcomes. But Jenna, since you're here and you're new, I'm going to give you the last word on this because I wanted to hear a little bit more on your thoughts without going too long, over an hour and a half for this episode. But give us your last word and then we'll get out of here.
Okay. Like I said, I think that giving people study aids and tips and tricks is totally fine. But he was all of the ists, right? Racist, ableist, sexist, ageist, like all of the things, and making generalizations is incredibly detrimental to patient care, right? Like a 25-year-old can have congestive heart failure. A baby can have congestive heart failure. We're not looking for these tropes. And when you start just looking for that, like what you think someone in CHF, for example, should be, you're going to kill people.
No, and I think that's right, because we talk about how our patients don't read the book, but also the patient has no responsibility to meet our expectations. And Occam's razor is the simplest solution is usually the best one, all things being equal. And there's a kind of a secondary thing where it's like the patient can be as sick as they want to be. They can have as many illnesses as they want to have,
Absolutely. You need to learn your physiology so you can learn the pathophysiology of these diseases, because if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. It doesn't matter what color the duck is, it's a duck. Yeah.
No, I think that's right. And there's a lot to talk about with this. Again, I don't know that this particular topic is going to stay out there for very long. But I don't think that sticks around for very long, but it is an ongoing conversation that we're of course going to have. So if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to comment down below and subscribe. If you're listening anywhere else where you get your podcasts, be sure to subscribe. Check us out on all the different medias. Check us out on EMS1. Follow us everywhere and do all the other stuff, blah, 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 blah. But thank you for listening. Listen to all the stuff. But thank you for listening. Be sure to check out everything else that we do. And for the Overrun Podcast, I'm Ed Bowder.
I'm Dan Schwester.
And we'll talk to you all next time. We'll see you next month.